Montana Territory, 1873. The bitter winter wind howled across the plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of an early and unforgiving season. Preston Keller stood at the edge of his modest homestead, watching as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall from the darkening sky. At 26, Preston had already spent 5 years trying to carve out a living on this unforgiving land, convinced that solitude was the price of survival in the West. A man stands alone out here, his father had told him before consumption took him 2 winters past. The moment you let someone in, you give this land the power to break you. Preston had taken those words to heart, building walls around himself as sturdy as those of his cabin. The neighboring homesteaders had long since stopped inviting him to socials or barn raisings. Even in the small settlement of Clearwater Creek, 10 miles south of his land, he kept interactions brief and businesslike. His ranch hands respected his skills and paid little mind to his reserved nature, content with fair wages and clear direction. As twilight settled across the land, Preston surveyed his modest spread, 40 head of cattle, 6 horses, and nearly 300 acres that he'd purchased with every cent his father had left him. Not much by some standards, but it was his, earned through calloused hands and a back that ached beyond his years. Mr. Keller. Riders approaching from the east, called out Hank, one of his 2 hired hands, pointing toward the horizon. Preston squinted against the falling snow. A small group on horseback approached slowly, 4 figures moving with obvious caution. Not raiders or outlaws, who would have come fast and hard. These riders moved with purpose, but without threat. Indians, Preston said quietly, recognizing the silhouettes. Relations with the nearby Crow tribe had been peaceful, if distant. Their reservation boundaries lay 10 miles to the north, and while occasional hunting parties passed through with permission, visits were rare. Preston grabbed his Winchester but kept it pointed downward as the riders approached. 3 warriors accompanied what appeared to be a young woman. The men remained mounted while she dismounted, stepping forward. Even in the fading light, Preston could see she was shivering violently, her buckskin dress insufficient against the plummeting temperature. "We seek passage," the eldest warrior said in halting English. "Storm comes. We return to our people tomorrow when it passes." He gestured to the young woman. "Grace Clearwater learned white man's medicine in mission school. She travels to help our sick children." Preston's gaze shifted to the woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, with long black hair partially covered by a thin shawl. Her dark eyes met his with neither submission nor challenge, just the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to navigate between 2 worlds. Despite her trembling, she stood straight, chin lifted slightly. "You may shelter in the barn for the night," Preston said, nodding toward the structure. "There's fresh hay, and it will keep the wind out." The warriors nodded their thanks, but as they turned toward the barn, the young woman stumbled slightly, her exhaustion evident. Something inside Preston shifted uncomfortably. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Keep your distance, show no weakness." But as the snow fell harder and the wind cut sharper, he found himself slipping off his heavy woolen jacket. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "You'll catch your death." Grace Clearwater looked at him with surprise, then gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice melodic and her English perfect. "I will return it tomorrow." As she wrapped herself in his jacket, the warmth of his body still trapped within its fibers, Preston felt a strange sensation in his chest, like a frozen river beginning to crack with the first thaw of spring. "There's stew on the stove," he found himself saying. "Enough for all of you, if you're hungry." The eldest warrior's weathered face showed brief surprise before he nodded. "We thank you for your generosity." That night, as the storm raged outside, Preston lay awake in his bed, wondering what had possessed him to share his food, his space, his very coat with strangers. It wasn't the Western way, not his way at least. Yet the image of Grace Clearwater's face, her quiet strength and dignity, lingered in his mind until sleep finally claimed him. Morning broke clear and cold, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Preston rose early, as was his habit, to check on his livestock. When he stepped outside, he stopped dead in his tracks. Stretching along his fence line as far as he could see were mounted warriors, dozens upon dozens of them, still and silent as the snow-covered landscape. For a heart-stopping moment, Preston feared the worst, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. Then Grace Clearwater emerged from the barn, still wearing his jacket, and walked toward him. "Do not be afraid," she said, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "They have come to honor you." "Honor me?" Preston asked, bewildered. "Why?" "Word spread quickly of your kindness," she explained. "Our people have known much cruelty from white settlers. A simple act of humanity is remarkable." The leader of the assembled warriors rode forward. "I am Chief Many Horses," he announced. "You gave shelter to my daughter when she was cold. You shared your food when she was hungry. You gave your warmth when the storm threatened. These are the actions of a true man." Preston stood speechless as Grace translated her father's next words. "Each warrior has brought a gift. Some bring meat, others furs or crafts. They offer friendship and protection to the man who protected the daughter of many horses." The revelation struck Preston like a physical blow. The chief's daughter. He had given his jacket to the daughter of a powerful Crow chief, unknowingly performing an act that would be seen as both brave and honorable. As the warriors began to dismount, presenting their gifts one by one, Preston caught Grace's eye. She smiled, a genuine, warm expression that seemed to reach inside him and touch something long dormant. "My father wishes to know your name," she said. "Preston Keller," he replied, finding his voice at last. "Preston Keller," she repeated, the syllables taking on a musical quality in her voice. "My father says you must visit our village when the warm winds return." Something in her eyes suggested the invitation was as much hers as her father's, and for the first time in years, Preston felt a flutter of anticipation for something beyond mere survival. The day the warriors came became a legend in Clearwater Creek. Preston's unexpected alliance with the Crow tribe transformed his standing in the community. Suddenly, the solitary rancher had become a man of influence, a bridge between two worlds that had existed in uneasy tension. Spring arrived with its riot of wildflowers and promise of renewal. Preston found himself riding north more frequently than his ranch work strictly required, ostensibly to trade with the Crow, but increasingly drawn by the chance to see Grace Clearwater. Each visit revealed new facets of her character. She had spent 4 years at a mission school in St. Louis, learning not only English but mathematics, science, and medicine. She moved between cultures with a grace that belied the difficulty of her position, respected by her people for her healing skills, yet viewed with suspicion for her Western education. "It is like standing in a river with one foot on each bank," she told Preston one evening as they walked along a stream near the village. At 20, she possessed a wisdom that humbled him. "The current pulls, and sometimes I fear I will be torn apart." "Why return then?" he asked. "You could have stayed in the East." Grace stopped, turning to face him fully. The setting sun caught in her long black hair, creating a halo effect that made Preston's breath catch. "Because these are my people," she said simply, "and this land is my blood. How could I abandon either?" Her words struck him deeply. Wasn't this what he had been doing all these years? Building walls, keeping everyone at a distance, abandoning the very concept of community that made survival in the West possible? "I understand more than you might think," he admitted. "After my father died, I convinced myself that connection was weakness, that to survive here meant to stand alone." Grace studied him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "And now I'm not so sure," he replied honestly. Their friendship deepened through summer and into fall. Preston found himself sharing thoughts he had never voiced aloud. His fears for the future of his ranch, memories of his mother who had died when he was just a boy, dreams he had long suppressed of creating something that would outlast him. In turn, Grace spoke of the challenges facing her people, caught between vanishing traditions and an uncertain future. She told him of her studies, her desire to heal, and her struggle to belong fully to either world. What began as mutual curiosity blossomed into respect, then friendship, and finally something neither was quite ready to name. Their worlds touched but did not yet merge, like two rivers running parallel, occasionally sending ripples across to the other shore. October brought an early frost, and with it, trouble. Preston arrived at his ranch after a supply run to Clearwater Creek to find his foreman waiting with grim news. "Cattle raiders hit Johnson's place last night," Tom reported. "Took half his herd and burned his barn. Word is they're working their way through the valley." Preston felt the old familiar tension settle between his shoulders. "How many men?" 6 or 7, according to Johnson. Well-armed and not afraid to kill. Shot one of his hands who tried to stop them. That night, Preston doubled the watch on his herd. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, gunshots split the darkness. Preston and his men rode hard toward the south pasture, arriving to find 2 of his cattle dead and his youngest hand, Billy, clutching a bleeding arm. They came out of nowhere, boss, Billy gasped. I got a shot off, might have winged one of them, but they were too many. How many cattle did they take? Preston asked, helping the boy stanch the bleeding. That's the strange part, Billy said, confusion evident in his young face. They didn't take any, just started shooting, then rode off when I returned fire. The next morning brought the explanation. As dawn broke, Preston found a crude message nailed to his barn door: sell or die. The raiders hadn't come for cattle. They'd come with a warning. Within days, Preston learned he wasn't the only one receiving threats. 3 other ranchers had been approached by representatives of the Eastern Montana Land Company, a shadow organization buying up properties for the coming railroad. Those who refused to sell had experienced similar accidents. The situation escalated quickly. Johnson's place was hit again, this time with such force that the family abandoned their claim altogether. Another rancher found his well poisoned, his livestock dying in droves. Preston rode to Clearwater Creek to speak with Sheriff Miller, only to discover the lawman had suddenly taken ill after a meeting with company representatives. His deputy, barely 20 and clearly intimidated, could offer no help. This is bigger than us, Keller, the young man said nervously. These company men have connections all the way to Washington. Best just sell and move on. Returning to his ranch, Preston found an unexpected visitor waiting. Grace sat calmly on his porch, her expression troubled. Your men tell me you have enemies, she said as he dismounted. Preston nodded, too weary to question how she knew or why she had come. Land grabbers. They want my property for the railroad that's coming through. This affects my people as well, Grace said, rising to stand before him. The railroad will cut through hunting grounds promised to us in the last treaty. Chief Many Horses sent me to say that your enemies are our enemies. For a moment, Preston was tempted by the implied offer of alliance. But the thought of bringing trouble to Grace's people, of potentially sparking violence that could be twisted against the Crow, stopped him. This is my fight, he said firmly. I won't bring danger to your door. Grace's eyes flashed. Is that what you still believe? That we must each face our storms alone? She stepped closer, her voice lowering. The day you gave me your jacket, you chose a different path, whether you knew it or not. Before he could respond, hoofbeats approached. One of Preston's hands rode up, his expression urgent. Riders coming, boss. Looks like trouble. Preston moved quickly, positioning Grace behind him as 5 men approached. He recognized the leader, James Wheeler, the land company's local representative. Wheeler's smile didn't reach his cold eyes as he tipped his hat. Mr. Keller, I see you've received our message. I don't respond well to threats, Wheeler. Preston replied evenly, aware of Grace's presence behind him. Wheeler's gaze shifted to Grace, his expression turning ugly. Keeping Indian company now, Keller? That explains a lot. These savages have filled your head with nonsense about holding on to land that progress demands. Preston's hand inched toward his holster. Say what you came to say, and then get off my property. Simple enough. You have 1 week to accept our offer. After that, Wheeler shrugged elaborately. Well, accidents happen in this dangerous country. After the men rode off, Preston turned to Grace. Something in her expression, a mixture of anger and resolve, made his chest tighten. You should go, he said. It's not safe here anymore. Is that what you truly want? She asked, her gaze never wavering from his. For me to go? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning that extended far beyond this moment. Preston looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the last of his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. No, he admitted softly. That's not what I want at all. Grace smiled then, reaching out to take his hand in hers. Good, because I have a plan. The next day, word spread through Clearwater Creek that Preston Keller had fled, abandoning his ranch in the face of the land company's pressure. Wheeler and his men rode out to claim their prize, only to find themselves surrounded by 50 Crow warriors who had been waiting in the surrounding woods. Preston emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, with Grace at his side. This is what's going to happen, Wheeler, Preston announced. You're going to ride back to your employers and tell them this land is not for sale. Not my ranch. Not any ranch in this valley whose owner wishes to stay. Wheeler's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. The company has powerful friends. So do I. Preston interrupted, gesturing to the warriors. And unlike your friends in Washington, mine are right here. What happened next would be retold for generations in both Crow lodges and settlers' cabins. The land company, unwilling to risk an Indian conflict that would draw federal attention to their strong-arm tactics, withdrew. When they attempted to reroute the railroad, they found themselves facing not only Preston and the Crow, but a united front of local ranchers who had finally found the courage to stand together. The victory came at a cost. Preston knew there would always be those who resented his alliance with the Crow, who whispered behind his back about the woman who increasingly shared his days. But as summer turned to fall and then winter again, he found himself caring less about those whispers. On the first anniversary of the day he had given his jacket to a shivering woman in a snowstorm, Preston rode to the Crow village with a question in his heart and a small bundle wrapped carefully in his saddlebag. Chief Many Horses received him in his lodge, listening solemnly as Preston spoke of his feelings for Grace and his intentions for the future. When he had finished, the chief remained silent for a long moment. My daughter walks in two worlds, he finally said. Any man who seeks to stand beside her must be willing to do the same. I am, Preston answered without hesitation. The chief studied him, then nodded once. Then speak to her. The choice is hers to make. Preston found Grace by the river, gathering willow bark for her medicines. When she saw him, her face brightened in a way that made his heart race. I have something for you, he said, withdrawing the bundle from his bag and unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a jacket, newly made of the finest wool, lined with rabbit fur, with intricate beadwork along the collar that he had commissioned from one of the tribal elders. A year ago, I gave you my jacket because you were cold, he said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. I didn't know then that in that moment, I was also giving you my heart. Grace took the jacket, running her fingers over the beadwork with wonder. I come to ask if you will accept both again, Preston continued. Not just for a storm, but for all the seasons to come. Tears shimmered in Grace's eyes as she looked up at him. The spirits work in strange ways, she said softly. They sent a snowstorm to show a lonely man and a woman caught between worlds that neither had to walk their path alone. Her answer was in her kiss, gentle at first, then fierce with promise and possibility. When they parted, she slipped the jacket on, smiling at how perfectly it fit. Yes, she said simply, for all the seasons to come. Their wedding took place the following spring, twice. First in the traditional Crow way, with dancing and feasting that lasted from sunrise to sunrise. Then in the small church in Clearwater Creek, where Preston was surprised to see pews filled with settlers who had once avoided his gaze, but now nodded in respect. The ranch flourished under their combined vision. Grace's knowledge of native plants and healing brought new dimensions to their cattle operation, while Preston's determination and work ethic expanded their holdings. When their first child was born, a son with his father's eyes and his mother's smile, 200 warriors once again lined up at their fence, this time bearing gifts to welcome a child who represented the future of both peoples. Years passed. The railroad eventually came, but on terms negotiated fairly with both settlers and the Crow. Preston and Grace's ranch became known as a place of meeting and mediation, where disputes between worlds could be resolved with wisdom from both. On cold winter nights, Preston would sometimes stand at the window of their home, watching snow fall on the land that had once seemed so empty and unforgiving. Behind him, he could hear Grace's voice as she told their children stories, some from the white man's books, others from the oral traditions of her people. In those moments, he marveled at how wrong his father had been. It wasn't connection that made a man vulnerable in this harsh land, it was isolation. The strength to survive came not from standing alone, but from standing together. And it had all begun with a jacket, freely given on a cold Montana night.